Homesteads and Homeschools as part of the Liberty Hippie Podcast Network. If you like what we do, be sure to check out This Week in Liberpods, Peace Freaks, Cannabis Heals Me, and Free Market's Green Earth. We're living proof that libertarian doesn't mean washed up Republican.
So my guest today is Miss Beth Clark. She's over there in Idaho. I forgot to hit buttons, so we're starting over again. So Beth, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you doing this again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you reaching out to me. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, not a problem. So I know you're homeschooled. Got into a little bit before I realized what happened. So you're homeschooled the whole way through, all 12 grades or whatever?
Yep. Idaho is actually a pretty good state for that. And you actually have to be careful when you're homeschooling in Idaho because of the way the laws are set up. You have to make sure that you are truly homeschooling and not using an online charter school. Because if you're using an online charter school, you actually are held to the same requirements legally as you would if you were going to public school. As far as having to take all the tests, government interfering with your life and your choices, all that fun stuff. And so we truly did more what was along the lines of unschooling, or as my mom put it, she raised us by benign neglect. So,
I like that.
Yeah, it worked out well. We mostly just always had a lot of books in the house, and we were allowed to learn at our own pace, pursue subjects as we wished, and it's made us some pretty weird, quirky people. So I think it's worked.
I'd rather be a little weird and quirky than just, run of the mill.
Yeah.
General. But so you were I know you mentioned you had siblings. Did they go to public school at all? Or none of you were?
Yeah, all of us have been homeschooled. And it's been interesting mostly to see how each child learns differently. I was learning to read and was able to read at 5 or 6, but my brother didn't learn to read until he was about 10. When he did learn to read, he was competent within a year and was right up to or above his grade level within that year. So kids learn things at different paces. I've struggled with math. My brother had a natural knack for it. So it's been interesting to see how truly learning is not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Yeah, and that's what is like so big about it. Like you think about a little kid in kindergarten being forced to try to read, and they're not there yet developmentally, and they have to, and what kind of distaste for reading that instills on them for the rest of their life. And it's there, and it's tough. And you see some of that when you're able to homeschool and you're able to kind of look at them and, okay, this is not what they're so good at. We're going to take it slower on this, but they excel at that.
Yeah.
And they do. I think you seem to catch up for the most part.
Honestly, yeah. Most kids, I can't say all, there's always going to be outliers, but most kids, when allowed to learn, when allowed to enjoy learning and seek it independently, have a passion for it their entire lives. It's actually kind of fun because you go through a weird transition when you're a homeschooler, especially when you're kind of into work. When I was about 13 or so, I used words that were too big for myself. I used weird terms. I referenced odd bits of science. And so people always assumed I was maybe more intelligent than I was. And I was truly that weird homeschooler. And as you get older, as you get into your 20s, people cut you a little more slack. And it's not as noticeable. I still stick out a little bit awkwardly sometimes. Weird thing, my mom actually, one thing that actually worked really well with us being homeschooled is she ran a at-home business. She's actually a historian and designs patterns and all sorts of cool stuff like that. And so I actually learned to answer phones for a business from a very young age. And so, nice. And that's actually proved very useful my entire life. One job I was taking phone calls at a funeral home to help pick up dead people. So that was exciting. And I've worked several office type places, and now I'm at a hardware store. And so lots of phone answering, and it's proved very useful. I didn't realize that was a skill some people didn't have. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I tell you now, even as an adult, I have to make some phone calls for stuff that I do, and it can be unnerving. It's one of those things that and to have the proper etiquette and to be confident on the phone sometimes is just,
A nightmare.
it's difficult for me. And, yeah, you figure those things out. Like, I'm good at this. You learn things. You learn how to talk to people. It's interesting, because everybody talks about how unsocialized homeschoolers are and the whole 9 yards. And here you go.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a big misconception or misunderstanding. Because it's not that homeschoolers are unsocialized, it's that we socialize differently. Because obviously with public school, grades are kept, children of the same age are kept together. They're kept in rooms together. They're only really allowed to talk small segments of the day. They get a very narrow experience, socially speaking. So while other kids were in school, my family was visiting history museums or markets or Scottish festivals or any number of odd places. And so we really got to talk to a broad range of people. And it's interesting to get to do that. Not a lot of kids get to do that. And I'm sad for that, honestly.
Yeah. You think about the amount of, who knows whether that was, going to museums and stuff is actually usable, but it's like real life. That's real life stuff, sitting down in a classroom, learning out of a book, sometimes what's I would say not real, but things that aren't really that pertinent, kind of throws you. It's like, wait a minute, I could be out doing that. And that's one of the things that we've started to do a little bit more of, try to work some of those, I'm going to call them field trips, but get involved with those sort of things and then use what's available.
I think it'll be really interesting coming out of the pandemic that is COVID-19, seeing what happens with public schooling, just because I've run into a pretty even split of parents, one set who are so excited they didn't even know this was an option. And so now they're actually looking into all these resources that families in the community have been developing for years, and they're just free online for people to use. And they're just now discovering these, and they're like, guys, this stuff exists? No way. And we're like, yes.
It's I hope that there are a number of people that can see that and feel that. And I've talked to a few that have, but then you have that other side that, like, they're totally bought into the public school being sent home, and this is what homeschooling is, and this is awful. And, I know a little girl that is just like falling apart at the seams because that's all she does all day now is she sits in front of the computer, watches the teacher, watches through YouTube, goes through Zoom. She has no real communication with her friends. That interaction is not there. And it's like, that's not homeschooling. That is not what this is. Like, it's
public school at home. And that honestly has been a little bit frustrating. I'm trying not to be very, very jaded, but honestly I am. Because I see a lot of folks online complaining about their kids. And this honestly makes me very sad when people complain about their children. Oh, I can't wait till they go back to school. I can't stand them. They're your children. You
I know.
them. Raise them to be people you like.
Yeah, right.
Be involved in their lives.
Yeah, you gotta. I wonder how much of that, like, if you had your child home from the beginning, and then one parent was able to stay home, or you were able to work it so that kids didn't have to go necessarily to daycare or even get into school. They weren't in school. Would your child develop into someone that you would like? Is school, going off to all these places, allow other people's influences enough that they turn your child into something that you don't care for? Or is that just lazy parents that don't like their kids?
That's definitely an aspect of it. I would also say, honestly, that another big part of it is not even the exposure to the different ways of doing things. I would even say it's more, they don't know their kids. They aren't used to having to socialize with them all day long. And so suddenly having to do that, they have no coping skills.
Yeah.
To deal with it.
Yeah. So we've had to play a few more games of Monopoly than I would like, having my wife home from work and stuff. But we got through it all right.
And you did.
My son loves
Monopoly, which is impressive.
Yeah, my son loves Monopoly, and, like, it's tough. It's tough because we do it for him sometimes, and sometimes it's like, man, we don't have half a day to, like, set aside and do this, and we'll take pictures of the board, it's set up, write the money down, put it away. I'm like, oh God, you know, when I was a kid, we didn't have those, you know, smartphones and all the fancy cameras, and there was no way of telling what's going to happen. Dog walks by and game's over, but you know, we're stuck. So
Yeah,
so you grew up in Idaho, then you guys were schooled in Idaho. How was that when you got to like the sort of older grades, I guess, like high school and stuff? Did you guys kind of?
well, so it was a mix of things, honestly. Like, so it's a fairly the population is pretty largely LDS in the city I live in.
Really?
And we ourselves are LDS, but we've always been a little more liberty leaning than a lot of the folks here. And so we had some youth group and things like that as we got into our team. But honestly, that was kind of a struggle, getting into those teen years and trying to do things with the rest of the group, and they did things so differently, or they already had their groups and we weren't a part of that group. And you know, there's a few social things we were involved in, and so I'm not gonna lie, like socially speaking, that was difficult, if only because there wasn't a very large homeschooling population in our immediate area. And I think that was the roughest thing, is you stick out like a sore thumb. You truly are the weird, unsocialized homeschoolers. I did find out that some, like, high school is horrifying. I would not have survived, straight up. I would have, not with any sort of sanity intact. As it is, I struggle a little bit with anxiety, and there's some depression in the family, like some not so great stuff, and some ADD. So you add that all together in a public school setting, and I would not have done well at all.
Yeah, it is kind of, you know, pick your poison, right? I mean, there are kids that will go to public high school and thrive on that. That's, you know, they thrive on all that, but there's kids too that won't, you know, they fall through the cracks, and it's just, and so you know, which one do you want?
Honestly, what I would love to see is public school is going to continue to be a thing. I think it's really nifty to shift the way we look at schooling. If you were to apply some unschooling ideas and methods to the public school sector, decreased class sizes, mixed age classes, selective courses and selective subjects, giving people actual choice and freedom to explore, and cutting down almost completely on the number of standardized tests, because those don't anybody.
Yeah. It's wild when you like look at, when you break up a school year and actually look at, you know, how much time goes into tests, preparing for tests, taking tests, like all that. It's mind boggling, you know? And I mean, there's sort of tests in the quote real world, but not like the ones that you take in school, you know? I mean, it's
definitely not.
But I don't know. So, I guess, did you guys were you doing any like sports and stuff, or was it your social group mostly just through youth group type stuff, or? Mostly
through youth group. We didn't, none of us are very sportsy. We're all pretty terrible at it. I was actually kicked out of volleyball once I hit adult ward stuff, so that was exciting. Because apparently I'm too violent in volleyball. I don't know how to hit it properly, so I punch it, which is not
okay.
So no, mostly like, it was mostly youth group stuff. We did our best to kind of stretch and find friend groups, but it is admittedly very difficult to have any sort of a same age friend group when you're homeschooled, if everyone else around you is public schooled. If only because they are at school so much of the day, there's no time left. I mean, the responsibilities placed on these kids are insane. They have to go to school and do work for hours and hours, and then they have to come home and repeat some of that work for several hours. Many are still expected to get jobs, especially in lower income families. And then there's family relations time. And they have to get proper sleep and eat. And and then they don't have any time for literally anything else. I don't know. I truly, like, hats off to the kids who are doing it, because that is a lot to deal with.
Yeah, it is. It's a heavy schedule. I think it's becoming more heavy, and it's curious 'cause I think a lot of the socialization in public schools is moving more, and everywhere, is moving more online. And I forget who it was. Somebody I know. I think maybe we go to church with them. I don't know. Found it was difficult for them to maintain friendships because they went into public school for a little bit, and they didn't have a phone.
Yeah.
And they got a phone, but then they didn't know what like all these apps were. And they didn't, all these kids are talking to each other on, I don't know, Snapchat or whatever. And kid had no idea like
Yeah.
what and so that learning curve was there. And I think it was somebody I talked to on the podcast. But I don't think he came out of public school after that for a year.
Yeah.
That's what it was. They're missionaries over in Ghana. And so they came back for a year, and that's what it was. Okay. But, and so there's that part of it too. And I think to some degree, I don't know how old you are, but I think with the advent of, the internet and Facebook and all that stuff, like our kids right now, in terms of socialization and that sort of thing, we have like homeschool co-ops. Like there's a sizable group and it's so much easier to find people now than, before you could find people online, like random people that you would never ever meet in your life.
Right.
And now you can. And so there is.
I'm honestly very encouraged to see how many people are turning to homeschooling. And yeah, it is so much easier with things like social media to find those groups locally. Nowadays, in my city, there are homeschool co-ops. They're really expensive, so that's less than ideal. but these do exist, which is really huge for the people who need that support. And I think, honestly, as more people turn to homeschooling, we'll actually see a few different kinds of co-ops emerge. You've got your stereotypes with homeschoolers, and the ones around here, tend to be very much kind of the Christian homeschooler, the denim jumpers and the hair scrunchies and the we don't say poop and fart. So, and that's not all of them, but that's a lot of them. But I know a lot of folks, even more nowadays, who are a little bit more crunchy hippie and a little more left-leaning libertarian or whatever, and they're getting into the homeschooling and realizing that there isn't the same social network. So I think it'll be neat to see some of those people, some of them friends of mine, build their own groups, build their own societies and communities, and that's kind of cool. Honestly, I like that there's options nowadays.
Yeah, and that's been really like fun to see, because that was one of our concerns, when we decided to start homeschooling. Where are we going to go to find these things? And one of my biggest things was sports. I always did sports of some kind: soccer, running, rugby, whatever. I had something going on, and that was always a big outlet for me personally. And to think that my kid is going to get to like high school level and he's not going to be able to engage in that, it's kind of off-putting. Yeah. But you see some of that stuff developing now, right? Like different camps, different clinics, different like rec leagues that homeschoolers can participate in, and all this stuff. And I think as you see more people kind of come out, like you said, they have to start developing communities, and it's going to be a fun thing to watch as it grows, provided it's allowed to grow.
Yes. Well, if you're stubborn enough, anything can grow. Just be a thistle, not a daisy.
Yeah. So how does that work for you guys out there then, in terms of regulations and stuff? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Has it changed? Have you looked into it at all?
Not a ton, honestly. It's stayed pretty stable. It's more just that people don't tend to check in on those laws. For instance, in this area, we have actually a lot of at-home charter schools, and people think they're in that safe zone because they're homeschooling, but they're not, because statute-defined homeschooling is different. And so,
are are those the public schools that like they call it a homeschool, but it's offered through the state, and essentially it's just kind of like homeschooling, like online
Yeah.
through the state. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
all right.
Like a big one in this area is K-12.
Okay.
And there's a few others across the country, but
Yeah.
it's honestly, it's kind of a problem because people do conflate that with homeschooling, but it is basically the same thing like you're talking about with that public schooling at home. You're on a computer pretty much all day. You're not getting interaction even with the other siblings. It's pretty limited, actually. And you're still subject to the charter school's schedule. You don't have that freedom of movement and time that you would have creating your own scheduling curriculum.
Yeah. It's kind of misleading. Really, I saw it pop up here in Georgia, and I kind of looked at it. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And I'm looking and I'm reading, and I'm saying, "Wait a minute! This is just like public school at home. Why are you calling this homeschooled? Like, what is that nonsense? Get out of here!" But yeah, and I that's too bad that. I mean, it makes sense that it falls under the same guidelines. I guess it just didn't. People get caught. So, yeah. What do you remember? Like why you guys decided to homeschool, or what? Like where it was, or who? I guess you had brothers and sisters. Who was the oldest? Were you the oldest?
Yep, I'm the oldest, and I'm actually almost mid-20s. Not quite there, but almost.
Okay.
So I'm a baby. No. So yeah, I'm the oldest. I was the experimental child, basically. But when I was a baby, we tell people that the reason we switched to homeschooling and decided to homeschool was that I was hellish in the mornings, just cranky, and they couldn't have put me on the world. But the actual reason is our family has a history of very negative reactions to vaccines, and I was no exception. And this happened several times. It wasn't just like the first shot. It was a couple shots in. After each shot, I would spike high fevers and I would suffer febrile seizures. And we actually ended up going to a neurologist, and he advised, especially based on our family history, you should not do this. And here are ways you can be responsible and also not do vaccines. And so for us, that included homeschooling. It didn't feel remotely responsible to attend public school, to expose ourselves or the other kids. Just that cross-contamination is not a great idea. So I grew up practicing, like, this pandemic has not been a huge shift, honestly, because we grew up self-quarantining. We grew up washing hands constantly and not being around sick people. Like, oh, your child comes to the door and they have a cold. Guess what? We can't play today. Bye. We didn't get to go play if we were sick. We know families in the area who would let their kids all play together, even if one of them was hacking and coughing. That's just stupid. So that was the big deciding factor for my parents, is making sure that we were being safe and responsible and doing the best thing for our family.
Good deal. It's wild. The vaccines and the vaccine schedules, and wherever you fall on it, whatever. But when we were in Vermont, our first son was born, and just the stuff that they wanted to give him, the number of shots, and we're like, wait a minute, let's can we like slow down here? We don't need to do all, And so we gave him, he's vaccinated now. He did all this stuff, but like we drew it out as long as we possibly could. And the doctor was very, and then we ended up sending him to kindergarten, and he had to kind of get up to date for that. We didn't see any negative side effects, directly. And many people
don't, which is great. Like, so just to clarify, like, well, the reason I say this, okay, so a lot of times, especially when you're discussing this stuff online, you've got several different kinds of people in that group. You've got the ones who are like, oh, bleach enemas will cure autism, and also vaccine. Yikes! No, holy cow!
Yeah.
So I'm not in that group remotely, and essential oils don't cure everything. I'm a supporter of parental choice and medical liberty. So if you feel the vaccines are the best choice for your children, I support you in that decision. I would love to see more accountability when it comes to vaccines. I know that a lot of families see huge success with even delayed schedules, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm so glad for that. There's more and more research that they're developing actually for how to test for gene differences, the genes that are most likely to poorly react. In fact, there's a gene, I can't remember the exact initials. My mother calls it the mother effer gene, which sounds terrible, but it's like the MTHFR. And there's vast swaths of the population, especially in South America and in the Native American population. Like basically anyone who's not white is going to be more prone to poor reaction to vaccines. And they're only just now getting into this, but it only takes not even a poke, it takes a swab test to see if you have those gene markers.
Wow.
So I think as they develop that more, they'll be able to pinpoint what's going wrong. And I think that there also needs to be a certain amount of changing how the vaccine industry is treated, because right now they don't have accountability. They're not held remotely accountable, and that's one of my biggest issues, honestly, is the lack. If your kid dies, they're not affected by it at all, and that confuses me, honestly. That's not appropriate.
No, it's it's upsetting. It's disturbing. I think like the see, the thing with vaccines, like, right, like it just, they might do some good, but like when you watch the progress over time and what we have, where vaccines started and what that schedule looks like now, like we give people the vaccine for chickenpox, and how many kids ever died from chickenpox? Like it's negligible. But now, there's no wild chickenpox, and now, people have no natural immunity to shingles, like all this stuff. But you know what? We're going to look back in 20 years, 50 years, and it's going to be so ingrained that, oh no, chickenpox was this awful, horrible disease that, we thank vaccines because, and it's just, and you got to wonder how many things were like that, how many other diseases are like that.
And it's kind of interesting because actually, so like I mentioned, my mother's a historian, and I am not going to claim to know anywhere near as much as her because she has her field of study, man. But it's actually interesting. So one of the earliest forms of vaccination or inoculation that we have clear evidences of, I think was in the 1600s. They discovered that dairy maids who got cowpox were not getting smallpox. Cowpox is a very, very mild sickness. I mean, it's super mild, lighter than a light cold. And so they realized, hey, they're not getting this horrible killing disease. And so they would literally take the pox, the scabs, cut open a little hole in your skin and stick the scab on and purposefully infect yourself, because then you wouldn't get smallpox. Obviously, hygiene also helps a ton. In the 20th century, we saw huge and immediate decreases in things like polio, if only because clean drinking water and proper sewage became the norm. It started to become normal. And since polio is literally caused by ingesting fecal matter from contaminated water, like it's not something that just randomly happens. There were reasons it was rampant in low-income areas.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild to look at. And I guess that's, what happens when industry gets ingrained with government mandates. I don't, but, and I always fall off, and I'll try to move along with this, I always wonder, right? Like because when you get like chicken pox, right, and any of these things, and your body fights it off, you still have some of that like in your system. You have that natural immunity there. When you remove it completely, I'm just not convinced that we know that there's not some other symbiotic relationship going on in the body. That like, you move all these things out of the way and then it makes more room for some other disease or sickness. I don't know. That's my wild, crazy tinfoil hat.
No, I'm totally there with you. I remember, well, I don't remember, but my mother told me, even when I was very young, and this was before, like in their small town in Oregon, because I was born in Oregon, they hadn't gotten the chickenpox vaccines into town yet, and some of the kids were getting it in our church group. And so they're like, well, we're getting all kids together. We're swapping binkies. We're licking each other. Like, it's a mess. And so everyone got exposed all at once so that there wouldn't be any repetition, there wouldn't be any continued awfulness. And it worked out really well, actually. My mom says that I was fussy for a couple days, but I never actually suffered symptoms.
Yeah.
And I was swapping binkies with the best of them.
Good deal. Good deal. So, all right. What are your siblings out of school then? Are they the youngest ones? Are they still in?
One of them is. So my younger brother, he's out, and he's actually now a welder. He's in a town just a little ways from us, and he's actually working. I think they actually do government contracts and stuff, and so he's loving getting to do welding. It's a fun thing for him, and he has kind of a natural knack for it, so that's kind of awesome.
Good deal.
And then my younger sisters are still. At this point, my youngest would be in junior high, and my middleest would be in high school. So they're right in that awkward age, and they're discovering all the joys of that.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's you look back and there's fond memories, but then when you really think, you're like, oh man, I don't know if I do want to do that again. But so you've got a couple little ones coming up. Now they're not quite school age necessarily. Are you thinking about sending them to school at all?
Not especially not while they're young. Because again, we're having to just with family history and everything, not able to do that. And so especially I think after this, we're going to see restrictions on vaccines and schooling tighten. And so it's just not going to be possible, I don't think. So basically at this point, the plan is to unschool them, and then if they reach high school and it's still an option, if they'd like to see about doing that, I'm open to them trying to do that. I'll just also be ready to catch them if it doesn't work for any reason.
Yeah.
But no, it's the joy of unschooling is that there really isn't a schooling age. So my 2-year-old, I mean, he knows most of his colors. He can talk about motors and batteries, and he's a little tech head. And so it's he's learning about stories. He has this wonderful imagination and builds his own little worlds. And that's so cool to see because there really isn't, it's not like you just suddenly start learning. Children are already so equipped to learn just through play. And so it's very exciting, actually. Even my 1-year-old, he's decided he loves books. So I think he's probably going to be my early reader. He just and waddle around, pick up all the books, and he actually will sit there patiently while we turn the pages and read the story.
Nice.
So it's interesting to see, and I'm already making some bets as to who's going to hit which milestones when. I'm seeing similar patterns to myself and my siblings, so it's kind of fun.
Good deal. That's nice. It's fun to see how they grow and shape and all their differences. And it's when you think about that, how much kids really learn through play, and how much play they don't do anymore, whether it's in school or even at home. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, that's honestly something that I'm pulling back on hugely, especially with my 2-year-old, is that for a little while we were having huge issues with it being very easy to put an iPad down with Netflix on. And that's so wrong for so many reasons. And so now that's not even an option. We don't have pads anymore, so that makes it way easier to not allow that. And I'm also with the boys in a much better situation where they can go outside and play. And honestly, I think if my boys could live outside, they would. And so just providing alternatives, I think, has been a really, really good thing for us. But it is so easy, especially if we've got 2 little ones. It's very easy to rely on tech very, very heavily and to just sort of pawn them off on a screen. Like, I get it. I 100% get it. It's so much easier. But long term, it is much more difficult.
Yeah. We, when my son was little, I think it was probably I think it was when my daughter was born. It's probably 2.5, 3 in there. And, you put the YouTube on, and he would watch Thomas the Train, stuff like that. And it did. We had to just stop because he just, I don't know how to explain it. His whole demeanor would change. And he just almost became grumpier and angrier and more temperamental. And I mean, he was already temperamental. He was, colicky and,
Yeah.
should have been an only child kind of kid. And so it's wild. It's crazy what the tech kind of actually does. And I don't know what it does, but it does something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's humans are built to move. Humans are built to do and to explore. We found that especially with boys, but I get pretty cranky myself. They have to be outside. Like people in general have to be making sure that they're doing things and actually moving their bodies. And honestly, that helps so much. My brother, he got real like basement dwelly and cranky and awful in his teen years. And then we'd send him out to go mow lawn, and he would chipper right up, and he'd be telling jokes. And so it was, like you said, night and day difference. It was crazy. And so it's people need to move. People need to be able to get outside and move their bodies.
Yeah. It's they certainly do, and it's tough to do when you're being told that you will kill grandma when you go outside. But it definitely it helps, and I think just being just keeps that positive mind frame. I think a lot easier to do.
We're honestly spoiled here, just because I know it's so much worse on the East Coast there, and guys have less space if nothing else to a degree, and I think the laws there and the restrictions socially are worse right now from what I've heard. Here, honestly, people are pretty lazy about it, and we do have a big backyard. We can go outside. We can't see grandma, but we can go outside and do things. And I realize how spoiled we are. And I can't, again, huge respect to all the people who are weathering this thing and they don't have that option.
Yeah, we lived in New York City for a couple of years before my son was born. And, we're down here in Georgia in the middle of nowhere. And I think about that sometimes, just being packed in a big old apartment building like that with, your outdoor space is the fire escape, and that's it. And it's no wonder people are getting real sick, and it's real bad up there, but all right. I don't want to keep you too long. But I don't know, anything else you want to get out there?
Let's see here. I don't know. I think one of the biggest points of advocacy for homeschooling is that you're going to raise humans who don't conform easily. You're going to raise humans who are willing to explore and do different things differently and think outside the box because they don't see a box. And you have to be prepared to embrace that and help that to grow into a capable adult. And I think that as the years go by, and as we see more homeschoolers, and as we see more free spirits in general, growing up and getting to voting age, I think we're going to see some very positive changes across the country. At least I hope we will. I mean,
certainly hope so.
That's the hope. So just basically be willing to step back and let your kids run.
Yeah. Good deal. All right. Well, I appreciate it. Do you have anything you want to plug? I know you're over there on the Twitter. Anything else? Any place else?
Yeah. Mostly Twitter. I do a little bit on Facebook. If you're in Eastern Idaho and you're libertarian leaning, I run East Idaho Libertarians on Facebook. It's a Facebook group.
All right.
Check me out there. Aside from that, honestly, I mostly just yell at people on Twitter.
All right.
So yeah, nothing too exciting. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Good deal. I'll throw those links in the show notes and go check that out. All right.